Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining this webinar on the Camille and Henry Dreyfus Foundation. My name is Karen Allen. I'm the chair of the Department of Chemistry at Boston University. Today's webinar is hosted by our Office of Research at Boston University, and it's intended to give faculty across the university the chance to learn about the Camille and Henry Dreyfus Foundation. So the foundation is one of the nation's most important funders of chemistry and the chemical sciences, and I'm very pleased that Scott Siegel, the executive director of the foundation, has agreed to spend this hour with us. So our plan is to begin by giving Scott 30 minutes to provide us an overview of the foundation and talk about this year's Dreyfus Prize and other programs. And after that, I'll post questions that were previously submitted through our registration portal. And after that, we'll open up to any additional questions that all of you might have. If you put the questions in the chat too, that's fine. We can take them from the chat. We're recording this meeting and it will be posted on the site of the Office of Research, so you can recommend it to any of your colleagues who might find it useful, who might have missed the event today. So just to give you a little bit of background, established in 1946 by chemist Camille Dreyfus in honor of his brother, Henry, the Dreyfus Foundation's mission is to advance the science of chemistry, chemical engineering, and related sciences as a means of improving human relations and circumstances throughout the world. The foundation supported BU for almost 40 years, most recently with a generous grant under its machine learning program, which made an award to Quang Qui to better understand protein allostery. QC is actually in our department, so great. It was great for us. Scott Siegel took on the role of executive director in 2021. He spent more than 35 years as a scientific and business leader. Most recently, before Dreyfus, Scott was in the leadership of the American Type Culture Collection, ATCC, a nonprofit that collects, stores, and distributes standard reference microorganisms, cell lines, and other materials for research and development. Scott, we use ATCC all the time.
Sure,
big fan of ATCC. So Scott earned his PhD in biochemistry from SUNY Downstate, completed postdoc studies at pharmacology at Yale, and spent the early part of his career working in R&D. He has more than 60 publications and patents and contributed to the development of 3 launched products. So again, Scott, thank you so much for joining us, and the screen is yours.
Thank you. And the first thing I'm going to note, and I don't know if you all can see it, so I am wearing a striped Brooks Brothers shirt, and it looks very psychedelic on my screen. So if you're seeing that effect, I can promise you it's not your eyes. It's just the camera or the screen. Thank you, Karen, for that wonderfully kind introduction, and also to you and John and the whole team at BU. For inviting us to be here today. We exist for you. We don't exist for us. We exist for you and all your colleagues and sister institutions around the country, and in some cases even around the world, depending on the program that we're interested in. Before I talk about the Dreyfus Foundation, I wanted to take a minute and just make mention that there are a couple of my colleagues from the foundation on the call today. Jerry Brandenstein, who is our associate director, was actually at Plymouth Rock when the foundation landed but he's been with the foundation for over 33 years and really has contributed in almost any way, shape, or form you can imagine. So if there's a question that I won't know, Jerry will know the answer to it. I'm also pleased to introduce Ali Chunabek. She is a relatively new addition to the team at the foundation. She's been with us maybe about 7 or 8 months. She joins from the Sloan Foundation, where she was doing a terrific work in scientific communications, and she worked previously for the Dana Foundation. but most importantly, she is an alumnus of Boston University. So she is home right now, and many weekends when we talk about where we're going, she's heading from New York back up to Boston to visit her friends from the BU days. So she was particularly delighted to be part of the discussion. And I also see that Chloe Rickard is on the call. Chloe's our administrative assistant and all around general purpose, do everything and anything. And Chloe and Allie joined at the same time. So with that introduction, Allie, can you tee up the slides for me? And feel free to ask questions at any time, or as was mentioned, to use the chat feature. If you go to the next slide, please. So I think this was mentioned by Karen. The unique thing about the Dreyfus Foundation is that we are uniquely focused on the chemical sciences. And I'll show you in a minute that it's a pretty big tent. There's a lot of things going on in the chemical sciences, but that big tent is where we focus. We don't do anything in physics. We don't do anything in diseases. To the extent chemists are doing stuff in that field, yes, we do. But we focus on the chemical sciences. And as you'll hear, we're very academic focused. That's really where our focus is. It was mentioned 1946, so we're a 76-year-old foundation. This is Chemistry Week, if you've been following the ACS postings. And I think it's about fabulous fibers and materials. That's actually how the Dreyfus brothers got into chemistry. They were both organic chemists from the University of Basel at the turn, not of the most recent, but of the century prior. And they developed cellulose acetate technology that transformed both the textile industry and, interestingly enough, the movie industry as one, because before then people would use cellulose. They'd put a film up, and about 5 minutes into it, it'd all go up in flames. They developed the non-flammable cellulose acetate that you could actually watch the whole movie before needing a fire extinguisher. They also did work for the aviation industry and all sorts of interesting things. And their company, Celanese Corporation, became a huge Fortune, I don't know, it's Fortune 100 company here in New York. We do have a very long history of distinguished awardees, board members, advisors, and reviewers, and I'll show you some of those people. And we've given away now north of $150 million in various awards and grants since we were started. Next slide, please. So this is our mission. And this was set up decades ago, and I think it still rings true today: to advance the science of chemistry, chemical engineering, and related sciences as a means of improving human relations and circumstances throughout the world. That's it. That's what we're here to do. Next slide. I mentioned our board and advisors and some of the lay members of our board who are connected to the Dreyfus brothers in a number of ways. And then starting with Matt Terrell, and then the lower level are both our board members and our distinguished advisors. And you might recognize some of the names and faces of people who I'm sure many of you know. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we cover every aspect of the chemical sciences, even if it's not listed here, but we cover it all. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit of an overview, and I'll maybe take a minute to talk a little bit about each one of these elements. So early on, we did more ad hoc kind of grant giving. We had a lot of special grants projects. We built buildings. So if those of you have taken the T across town and been on the MIT campus and gone to the so-called D building, D stands for Dreyfus. That building was built in the 1960s. with a grant from Dreyfus. There was another building built in the Research Triangle Park that actually was also built in the 60s and was old enough that it actually has been torn down and replaced with a new building. We've got 6 endowed professorships. We haven't done one of those in like 30, 40 years, but that is something that early on the foundation did. And again, lots of special grants. We used to give money to museums, but we've really changed the focus over the year to become a more program-driven foundation. And I think what's relevant to this group is one of our major areas of focus is early career faculty recognition and development. And I'll talk about that in a minute. There's actually 2 flavors of that program, one for R1 type research institutions that have PhD programs and one for primarily undergraduate institutions. We have the Dreyfus Award, which Karen also alluded to. That's for recognition of individual excellence. And because we've got an award cycle coming up right now, we'll talk about that a little bit. We do have a series of programs that we're beginning to cycle more quickly to try and find some funding for innovator or under-supported research areas. We understand, and we've been talking to many of your peers, that federal money is typically very, very restricted. You have to kind of use it narrowly. And one of the areas that foundations can fill a gap is, while we do focus our giving, there are times where we give the researchers a lot of latitude, which is the whole point of research. And then we do quite a bit in the education area, and I'll take a minute now and then a little bit later in the presentation to talk about some exciting new things we're doing in film and actually making films about chemistry to get young people really excited and inspired. But we've got a number of things in education that we do. And one that I'll talk about is our work in the DEI space. Obviously, that's very important in today's world. And we have had a partnership with the American Chemical Society for over 30 years now, where we have been a significant supporter of a number of their programs. And it's hard in a Zoom format, so I won't ask how many are familiar with the Scholars Program, but I'm guessing many of you know about the ACS program to give underrepresented youth scholarships who are pursuing chemistry, chemical engineering type degrees, both a scholarship and actually mentorship, which is equally important. And they have just a terrific track record in those students going on to graduate, in some cases going on to advanced degrees, some going to medical school, some going here, some going there. And I can tell you, and I'm sort of really proud of this. I mean, personally, I had nothing to do with it, but we are the longest supporter of that program and the second largest from a dollar standpoint in the history of that, decades long program. And I'll use the opportunity to tell you one interesting side story. So again, these are scholarships for underrepresented, what we would have called in the past disadvantaged groups. And over the course of 30 years, you might imagine a lot of individuals have rotated through the program and moved on to industry careers, academic careers, medical, become a lawyer, who knows what they actually ended up doing. But we have our own prestigious Teacher Scholar Awards. And this program has been going long enough that we now have 4 individuals who, as young undergraduates, received the Scholar Award, went on to grad school, went on to postdoc, went on to academic careers, applied for and won a Dreyfus, Camille, or Henry Teacher Scholar Award. So I think that's just a wonderful example of sort of connecting the circle, where we supported them as an undergraduate and then they come back, whatever it is, 10, 12, 15 years later and actually win our very highly competitive and prestigious awards for scholarship and education. And then we're also direct supporters of two very important DEI awards that the American Chemical Society gives out. And again, those are noted on the slide. So next slide, please. A brief history. Again, the first grant, I think Karen alluded to this, was made quite some time ago. It's just under 400,000 in cumulatively, and you talked about QC winning an award just very recently, and there is a history of at least 3 Camille Dreyfus Scholar Awards, which are extremely competitive, and often go to the really top individuals at top institutions. And I think especially in 13 and 14, I think it's quite a nice achievement that the department has had those awards. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the Dreyfus Prize. This is a biennial prize every other year, and it's really an individual has advanced the field in a major way through some sort of individual exceptional and original research. And I'll show you, we have about 7 or 8 winners. I'll show you the list of folks and the types of individuals that have received this award. It is open internationally. Most of our programs are US based, but this particular award is open internationally. And we did have a winner in Switzerland a couple of years ago. So this is open to anyone. Deadline is coming up in December, and then the winner will be announced in May. And the topic this year is imaging in the chemical sciences. And we try not to be overly prescriptive in super defining the topic. Obviously, you can define imaging in a number of ways. I think the statement here, visual representation of real space, spatial distribution, structure, composition, and properties of molecules, crystals, assemblies, materials. And that's inclusive of methods and techniques of data analysis. So that's really a pretty broad basket of things. It's a very nice award. There's a monetary award of $250,000, and that goes to the individual, actually, not to the institution. And then we sponsor a beautiful award ceremony at the prize winners institution. It involves a lecture, there's a ceremony, there's a medal, a ceremony, there's a lecture, and then there is a reception and a formal dinner. And then at the following year's Spring ACS National Meeting, we host a symposium in collaboration with the ACS on that topic. And we bring together anywhere from 6 to 8 of the other thought leaders in that field, as well as the prize winner. And we have what's basically a 3-quarter or a full day symposium to have different presentations on that topic. The last topic was environmental chemistry, and Jim Anderson from across the river at Harvard won for his work in really figuring out what the heck was happening to the ozone layer when the chlorofluorocarbon situation was happening, 30 years ago. And his work really led to the Montreal Protocol that stopped the use of those dangerous chemicals in air conditioning and refrigerants. And really, the ozone layer has rebounded since then. So that's the sort of thing that we do with that. And again, there's information on our website. Can I have the next slide, please? And again, here are the winners. So these nominations are open. And we look for folks like you who know people in the field to think about who might be nominated. And so nominating a peer or people who feel they might be their own work can get a peer to nominate them. It doesn't have to be from your own institution. But again, Jim Anderson, there's a lot of Boston here, as you can see. We've got three Boston, not surprising, that would be 3. but there's some very, very accomplished individuals. So if you are thinking about somebody on the topic of imaging in the chemical sciences, highly encourage you to nominate them. The information, none of our forms and applications are overly onerous. Intentionally, we try to make them reasonable. There are some letters of recommendation, some things that have to be assembled, but they're not a huge deal. And we're looking for nominations. So that's the Dreyfus Prize every other year. Next slide, please. And that's just real quickly the last symposium that we did at the 2022. So this last March, we had this symposium at, with the pandemic, our cadence, like everything on the planet, was a little bit off. So that was actually delayed a year. And here are some of the individuals that spoke, again, thought leaders, and then Jim Anderson gives the capstone speech at the end of the and these are open to everybody. Anybody that's a DACS meeting can attend this. Next slide, please. So we're well known for the Dreyfus Prize, but really our flagship award, I would say, is our Teacher Scholar Award. And this has been going for over 50 years. And at this point, we have over 1,000 people who have won that award. And again, it's really to recognize outstanding early career faculty in the chemical sciences. And these awards can be, very helpful, not just because of the money that comes with it and the ability to attend a meeting that I'll talk about in a second, but really the prestige, because it's very competitive. We have an outside jury that we use, so we don't necessarily directly make the awards. We rely on our outside reviewers to really help us pick the winners. And the award takes two flavors, as I mentioned earlier. What would apply to BU would be the Camille Dreyfus Teacher Scholar, and that's for PhD granting institutions. And then for the primarily undergraduate institutions, we have a version called the Henry Dreyfus Teacher Scholar. They are similar, a little bit more focus on education on the Henrys, a little bit more focus on the research on the Camilles. There are more Camilles. They do get more money. But in both cases, education is an element. That's very important. And in fact, when the foundation was founded, Camille Dreyfus was very, very keyed in on the concept of education and getting that next group of thought leaders and that next group of scientists trained. And ever since then, we've really been focused on excellence and really trying to identify those future leaders and giving them a hand up early in their career. So there's an annual award cycle. Let's see, can you go to the next slide? I just don't want to make sure. Yeah, so go back one slide. So there's an annual award cycle, and it's based on an institutional nomination. Each school gets one. So they're highly competitive. And again, they're focused on leadership. For the Camilles, it's a $100,000 grant, and you'll see the key word there being unrestricted. I cannot tell you how many winners I've talked to who say, I love unrestricted money. That's the best kind of money I can get. And they've used it for all sorts of interesting things. There is a research element to it, but once you win, you're basically free to do what you want to do, really over a 5-year period. There's also a symposium held in New York City every other year. And what we do is we sort of bulk together 2 cohorts of 2 different years of the Camille winners and 2 different years of the Henry winners. And we bring them to New York. And we are having that meeting actually a week from Friday. So that's going to be happening in New York City. And one of the things that the team and I have been doing is trying to make that as useful a meeting as possible. We have a poster session with some opportunity to everybody to interact, 2 different poster sessions, so everybody gets a chance to present and then talk to everybody else, and maybe make connections, build relationships. We bring in outside speakers. One of the things that I'm doing is, it used to be a very science only focused meeting, but I'm trying to bring in some professional development into it. So we have a talk about leadership. Actually, this year we have Andy Hamilton from NYU. If you know Andy, he's the president of NYU, but he happens to be a chemist. So he's going to be talking. We have a number of scientists. We have a talk about chemical education, and we have a talk about entrepreneurship. And again, over 1,000 or almost 1,000 alumni. And at this point, 10 different Nobel Prizes have gone to our award alumni. Next slide. So just drilling down one more level quickly, and I'll be quick here and try and get through the rest of this quickly. It supports research and teaching, young faculty. Again, it's institutional nomination, and it's independent scholarship in the early years of appointment, as well as a commitment to education, and that signals promise. And again, it's an unrestricted grant. Next slide, please. Oops. I'll mention the Jean Dreyfus Lecturership because BU is not directly eligible, because this is for PUI institutions to bring in a thought leader. But a thought leader from an institution like yours could be the speaker that's invited to a smaller school. But the idea is, can we get a smaller school where there is a crop of good students coming up, and there is seed corn for our field? Can we fund grants to bring really people that they wouldn't necessarily get a chance to interact with, to come to a smaller school, give actually a couple of talks, and the whole key is for it to be a couple of days. So they actually really interact with the students and the faculty at a smaller school. And then we toss in a small amount of funding for 2 summer students. So this is to take smaller schools and bring a leading person from one of the larger schools. So I bring that up because, those of you who have good connections at the smaller schools, please feel free to talk to them about these grants, and to suggest luminaries from schools like yours and your sister institutions. Next slide, please. We talked about the machine learning program. This is part of our attempt to seed new or underinvested areas in the chemical sciences. We had an earlier program in environmental chemistry. We sunsetted that. We started machine learning. And what we're doing right now is we're looking at actually accelerating the cycle of these programs. As I think most of you know, machine learning has become a fairly popular area for both research and funding. And because we're not a multi-billion-dollar foundation that can throw, huge grants, we try to put seed grants in. So we're in active discussions about when to rotate this program out and rotate the next program in. Typically, the deadline will be in April, so stay tuned. We may have this program next year, or we may take a decision to rotate in a different program, and then the announcements would be in August. But the idea for the foundation is to stimulate new areas where we think there's underfunding or underinvestment. Next slide. And then real quickly, our chemistry shorts film series. So this is aimed at high school and early college students, particularly at maybe a smaller school or a community college. And I don't think I have to tell everybody here, chemistry doesn't always get the best rap. Physics gets all the glory, biology gets all the money, and especially on the industry side, chemistry sometimes gets a bad rap. But the reality is, and as a biochemist, I became a biochemist. I was interested in life science, but I know chemistry underlies all of biology. Chemistry underlies many things. And we don't think that people really have an appreciation of that. So what we did was we founded a film series to make 6 to 9 minute more inspirational and aspirational than educational, but we do sneak some chemistry in there. And again, targeting high school and early college students, all free of cost, including accompanying lesson plans that we have educators make up for us for teachers. We've released 4 films today. We're in the process of making 6 more. We are working with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, as well as the Research Corporation. And we've had some of your favorite organizations that you know endorse the film series. And if you flip, I'm going to show you a 48-second trailer, just to give you a sense of the production that we do here. So I don't know if Allie, that'll include. I'm not hearing sound. See if we can do that.
There's no sound.
Can anybody hear sound? Yeah, I can't hear sound.
Let me try to share my screen.
And then I think we've got like one more slide and we'll be done.
Okay.
This transformation is not the result of any supernatural power or magic. Rather, it represents years of systematic work by earth-searching chemists. This transformation is not the result of any supernatural power or magic. Rather, it represents years of systematic work by earth-searching chemists.
You know what, Allie, we're getting some feedback. Why don't you just kill it? You know, I want you to go to the last slide. Yeah, you know, we put people on the moon when I was in middle school, and still we can't get hybrid meetings on audio visual to work. And I was in middle school.
It's so true.
We put people on the moon. So why don't you go to the I think we're at the last slide.
Yeah, hold on. Let me get that up there.
We have had it work for other universities when we've done this, but
It worked
today, the
earlier
Gremlins.
today.
But feel free to go on the website, you know, and again, it's all free. So this is Allie and Chloe. One of the things that we're doing is really trying to expand our social media presence. So we've got a Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn account, and then a separate series of accounts for the Chemistry Shorts program. We're making the next film right now about I'm having a brain freeze, about directed evolution.
Oh,
We're also going to be doing a film about the chemistry of food. We're looking at some film. We're looking about astrochemistry. We're looking about nanotechnology. These are all things that we want to get young people excited about. We want the films to have high production value, and we want them to be inspired. And they're short, so they're sort of in the not quite TikTok short, but they're short. So that ends the formal presentation. Apologies for running a couple of minutes behind.
thank you. Don't worry about running behind, because I think we have plenty of time to get in our questions. We've got 5 questions that were, posted ahead of time by people. And then again, people who are in the audience now live can put questions into the chat. So let me start out then with the questions that were previously posted. So the first question is, Dreyfus's mission is to advance the science of chemistry, chemical engineering, and related sciences as a means of improving human relations and circumstances throughout the world. So when the foundation evaluates proposals, is there an emphasis on the science itself, on the impact of that science, the impact it will have when it's applied, or do you seek it to have a balance of the two?
That's an interesting question. you know, we don't have an overly prescriptive mandate for our reviewers. This is a peer review, a jury review, and you know, your peers, we tend to have people who are very senior as our reviewers. And as an example, many of our board members started out as reviewers, so that can tell you. I would say the impact and the you know, just like it is in federal funding, is an element, and originality and innovation are an element. But I think the overriding thing that we look for in our programs, and it does vary a little bit by program, is really quality. It's the quality of the research. It's the quality of the individual's prior record. If it's a program that relies on you know, recommendation letters, it's you know, what those letters have to say about it. So we are often betting on people.
Okay.
Who are going to do those things. And we've had a pretty good record in picking the winners. So the answer is yes.
Got it.
Jerry, do you want to jump in? Did that make sense to you?
That makes total sense. And I think that from the founding of the foundation is that the quality of the proposal speaks for themselves. There's always a slight amount of wiggle room when you talk about awards that come from, say, departments of biochemistry that were maybe cleaved from a department of chemistry many years ago, as opposed to a department of biochemistry that may be in a school of pharmacy, for instance. There's very big differences between those. So to Scott's point is that we don't become overly prescriptive to our reviewers, but except for the mantra of quality, high quality.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's see. So the next question is sort of something you did touch upon, but how does the foundation look at investigators whose work is highly interdisciplinary or who don't work in traditional chemistry departments? So say biochemists in the medical school here, right, that they're doing chemistry or biochemistry, but in the medical campus. So do they receive the same consideration? Are there factors they should take into account or try to emphasize when they're making their applications? How should they approach the Dreyfus Foundation?
So let me answer that in a couple of ways. Way number one, and I can speak to this from my own experience because you mentioned my PhD. What you didn't mention was the ice age that I received it in, but it was 40 years ago. And the world was very different 40 years ago. You know, disciplines were much more siloed. And by the way, the best description of siloing I heard was somebody calls them cylinders of excellence. So the world was set up in cylinders of excellence.
Yeah.
We are very, very much in favor of interdisciplinary work. And in fact, our machine learning program, that was an element of that, because that can't be just one group. That by definition, you have to get different people involved. We are in the process of exploring ways to be more multidisciplinary. But I would say, and I don't want to speak out of school here, so I'll let Jerry also opine, we have had even just recently, at least one of our award winners that I can recall off the top of my head was not in a traditional chemistry or chemical engineering department, but the proposal and the work was spot on within the chemical sciences. So I think what matters is what you're talking about doing. You know, it's if it's work that's traditionally in the chemical sciences and the person is in a biochemistry department or even a physics department, I think. You know, I know we've had winners, and I don't remember Ali or Jerry off the top of my head, but I think we had somebody in a and in fact, I remember the reviewers talking about that and saying, well, that's interesting, but the project is what counts. So it's the project and the quality. So I don't know if, does that answer the question, Karen?
I think so. I mean, so as long as the person makes it clear, I guess I was asking, should they indicate anything in their application? Basically, it is what the application is aiming to do, whatever
Exactly.
it has to be chemistry. Right.
Or the chemical sciences, but that's a broad bucket of things.
Right. Very
I mean,
broad.
I have a degree in biochemistry. I studied enzymes. You know, Frances Arnold won her Nobel Prize in chemistry for enzymes, CRISPR, you know, there's a lot of overlap in things. So,
Sure.
But chemistry, it's got to be chemistry and it's got to be quality. Those are the things that really are important.
Okay, so let's see. So you've been in your role for over a year now. So what have you learned? Like, what do you see? What have you seen academic chemists like doing right? And where do you see opportunities to improve?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
I know, that's a loaded question. That's a toughie.
Well, yeah, now I've been in this role for a year and a half, but I spent 20 years at the bench, 3/4 of that in industry. And 90% of the time I had a project, I had at least one, if not more, academic collaborators. So I've been working with academia my entire career. You know, I think I'm going to tell you what I would like to see academia do. And this is me personally. It's not the foundation. So
Right.
That's the caveat. The biggest difference between industry and academia is time. It's actually time and money. So in industry, there's a saying, you can always get more money, but you can't get more time. So I worked in startups. I was in the Boston area for 6 years. I lived outside of Boston and I worked in biotech, you know, the 70-hour crazy biotech weeks. And I did it in the Research Triangle and I did it in Pennsylvania and I did it in the Boston area. And it's all about speed and moving quickly. And you get more money. It's the complete opposite in academics. You have all the time in the world, but money is hard to come by. Now, that's not true for everybody, but you know, for most people, that's true. I'd like to see that sense of urgency in some of what, you know, what people in academia are doing, because you guys are tackling some of the biggest problems on the planet. And we could use the help, us human beings that live on this planet.
Yeah.
So again, you know, and I'll give you an example. You know, in industry, I talked to somebody. Oh yeah, let's have a meeting. Okay, how about you know, it's Monday. Let's meet tomorrow at 3. In academics, it's, well, you know, in the spring semester, I think I have some time, so we'll talk. That to me, now for many things that's fine, but that's so yeah. But what they do right, I mean, you're educating our students. You're building the seed corn, as I call it, for the future. And you know, what concerns me, and I'm trying to struggle with is the concept of academic freedom. As I can tell you, as an industry scientist, when I worked for little startups that were well funded, I had freedom, and some of my best discoveries were side projects that I had the freedom to just do. I had some money, I had a big group of people, I could do stuff. Actually, I did a collaboration with a professor at Tufts at the time that became a multi-million-dollar project that Eli Lilly licensed from us. That was completely on Sunday kind of thing. I get the sense that academic scientists can't do as much of that as they used to. So that's my long answer to that question. I don't know, satisfactory or not.
Just to give you some, I don't know whether this is feedback or just food for thought, but in my own experience, one thing that NIH did for a couple of the newer types of grants is they actually had you set milestones at the end, not just have aims, but actually set timeline milestones at the end of the proposal. And maybe that would speak to your idea of having, you know, making sure there was that sense of urgency. In other words, you have to kind of set up your proposal in the first place so that you will have reached certain milestones in certain years. I don't know if that's, yeah,
Yeah, but the thing with industry is they all lie, because if you told them the truth, you'd never get funded. So they're all, oh, I can do this in a year. You know, it's going to take 3.
Right,
I don't think
right.
I think it's more of a cultural thing. I
right.
think it's a self-directed cultural thing. Like, I got to get this problem solved. Now, I think people personally behave that way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as you know, but as en masse, could we?
Right,
It's just an observation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Push back. I mean,
Yeah.
you
I
asked
see.
the question, so I'm answering it.
No, absolutely. I have I see some questions in the chat. I'll just ask you one more of the questions that came in ahead of time so I can make sure we get to the questions in the chat. So let me ask you one more of the ones. So where do you see the Dreyfus Foundation in 5 to 10 years from now?
That's another interesting question. One of the things that we're trying to do is to partner more with other foundations. We traditionally haven't done that. And I talked about the film series, and we are working primarily with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. So the secret of Dreyfus is, while we have a lot of money to any of us one individuals, we're not a multi-billion dollars. You know, some of these foundations are just absolutely humongous. Within the chemical sciences, we're uniquely focused. There are a few others that focus in that area, but we're one of the most unique foundations. But we only have so much capital that we can deploy. And, you know, I've always been a believer that 2 + 2 can equal 5 if you work with other people. And so that is something that we are looking to do. We've got it started even before I joined, because that collaboration was started by my predecessor, and Jerry and his colleagues were part of that. But that's an area that I'm interested in. And, you know, I'd like to continue to see us finding ways to support faculty at all stages of career. So we have the Dreyfus Prize, which is really for very senior people, sort of the end of their career. We have the Teacher Scholar Awards, which are early career. We have our underfunded area, which could be at any level of your career. But we also see a gap mid-career. There seems to be some gaps just post-tenure, mid-career, and we'd like to explore ways to support faculty mid-career. So
Yeah.
that's something we've heard. I don't know if it's something you see.
No, yeah, I think that is a thing. I mean, one thing that's really interesting to me is there'll be some great, really, I mean, people who push through, they get tenure, they get, promoted at an early age from associate to full professor. Now what?
Now what?
Right? They're a full professor. They're still fairly, they're mid-career, and yet they've got a lot of gas left in the tank, right? So how can we advance their careers? How can we promote them better, and give them the resources they need to really now take everything they've got and go for it, right?
And I've had people say, well, you know what? I got here on the basis of X research, but now I want to do Y, but everybody knows me for X. How do you make that pivot to something else? Because, smart people can do lots of things. They don't just, smart people can, in fact, I would argue that there is an advantage to not knowing, being stuck with dogma from a new, and stepping into a brand new field and just doing stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll read out a couple of the questions in the chat, if that's okay.
Please.
So yeah, one is from John here in our development office. Our office. So I know tenure is a criteria for your programs, but our medical school doesn't grant tenure. So we have rolling contracts instead. So would a medical school biochemist be eligible to apply for the Dreyfus Award, for example?
So technically, it's a tenure track position. And I don't know, Jerry, if we've ever had an exception to that, because it is tenure track.
I think the letter of nomination would cover what the institution's intent is. And it would be very clear based on if they built them a $12 million laboratory and there's committed 3 or 4 FT lines to this individual, the university is not going to pull back, and it's not the same thing as a adjunct instructor in, say, the museum on campus. There would be definite indicators from the university's perspective, again, through the letter of nomination, that would indicate a long-term commitment to this.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, another question here. Thank you for that. How are reviewers for the proposal selected? Can interested faculty reach out to become reviewers for the foundation?
So that's an interesting question. And this, I will file this question within the black box that we and many foundations by necessity do some of the things that we do. What I can say is typically we select the reviewers on advice of our board and scientific advisory committee. So we typically will reach out to people to ask them to become reviewers. They are typically, not always, but typically very senior in their career, or certainly at least mid-career or later. Often, if not always, I don't think all of them, maybe all of them, are former teacher scholars themselves. And it's a nice hook because they sort of feel guilty. Okay, well, I guess I have to do it because I was one, so it's my time to give back. So the short answer is no, we do the outreach, and it's usually based on the recommendations of our scientific and advisors and board members who you saw on that list, or some, pretty knowledgeable and accomplished individuals.
Great, thank you. Let's see. So do I see any other questions in the chat, or anyone want to unmute themselves and ask anything? Okay, I still have one. I think we have time for one more question that I had from the earlier questions that had come in ahead of time. So in your own experience, so how did being, I guess the question is, looking at it, you've already given us some of your insights actually into this, into how you see academics, but you've spent most of your career, or a great deal of it, in industry and also involved with entrepreneurship. So how did that prepare you for this role that you're playing right now? Like, how did you, yeah.
Very simple, not at all. No. Look, I fundamentally subscribe to what's called the good athlete theory. I want somebody who's mentally acute and can think and can analyze, and I don't care what their background is or where they came from or what school they went to. I mean, obviously those are indicators and can be. Some of us are early bloomers and some of us are late bloomers, and yeah, but I do like to think that having that different perspective. I mean, people ask me about my career because I've done a little bit of everything, even within industry. My career is unusual because I did discovery, I did development, I did small molecules, I did natural products, I did large molecules, I did drug discovery, I did a little bit of, and then I did business. And then I used to teach medical school and dental school, and then I taught MBA students. So, that's all completely different. So my standard line is I'm either really good or I can't keep a job. It's really as simple as that. So, which I stole, that line I stole from somebody and have been using it ever since. So,
Oh, that's,
so yeah, no, I look for good athletes. I think, you know, and that's why that's one of the things I love about academia. You know, you folks can think about lots of things and solve problems, and this whole interdisciplinary thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
no, it does. It's really interesting to hear about. I teach a class for young, for freshmen. It's a like freshman introduction to chemical research. And one of the things we talk a lot about is career paths and how they prepare you, how your path prepares you for the next step. So it's really interesting. So yeah, I think I agree with you. Sometimes the path doesn't prepare you for the next step. You just have to take the next step.
But it's interesting and it's never boring. So
Right.
and leadership works anywhere. If you're a servant leader in one area, you could be a servant leader in anywhere.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's all of our questions, both posted ahead of time and in the chat. So I'll close up the meeting unless anybody has anything else for Scott. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I just want to take a moment to let everyone know about the upcoming Dreyfus related deadlines. So the Dreyfus sponsored ACS Awards for encouraging underrepresented and economically disadvantaged students and for encouraging women in careers in the chemical sciences. Again, that's November 1, right? I think I've got that right. And the award recognizes work by individuals in encouraging students to elect careers in the chemical sciences and engineering and generating a broader appreciation for chemistry. So BU will be looking for a nominee for the Dreyfus Teacher Scholar Award program shortly.
Great.
So it'll be
Fantastic.
an internal competition. So, and that should open in the next few weeks. So just want to make sure everyone's on track with that. And thanks again for everybody for attending today, and you, Scott, and the others from the Dreyfus for joining us.